There are moments in a reporter's life when the notebook stays closed, when the questions you've prepared seem suddenly small, almost insulting, when you understand, without being told, that you've been granted admission to something you have no right to record, only to remember. For me, that moment came on a February night in 1963 in a rehearsal space above a shuttered millinery shop in Greenwich Village. I had come to meet Nina Simone. What I found instead was a woman standing at the edge of something vast and irreversible, deciding whether to step forward into the fire or turn back toward the safety of simply being extraordinary. I watched her choose the fire, and I have never in 50 years of journalism forgotten the look on her face when she made that choice. I was 46 years old that winter, still young enough to carry equipment, old enough to know which stories mattered. CBS had me everywhere in those days, Berlin, the Congo, Washington. But that February I was in New York, covering what we were just beginning to call the civil rights movement, though the term felt inadequate even then. How do you name something that was tearing the country in half while simultaneously stitching it back together along truer seams? I had interviewed Martin Luther King Jr. twice by then. I had filmed lunch counter sit-ins in North Carolina and freedom riders in Alabama. I had watched sheriffs turn fire hoses on children and ministers pray while being beaten with nightsticks. I thought I understood the contours of the story we were telling, but I had not yet understood what it meant to be an artist in such a time. To be someone whose gifts placed them on stages and in recording studios in the glittering spaces where Americans go to forget, and to be unable suddenly to help them forget, to be compelled instead to make them remember. I met Nina Simone through a mutual acquaintance, a jazz critic who'd grown tired of my ignorance about music. "You keep covering the marches," he told me over lunch, "but you're missing the other front." He arranged the introduction with a single phone call, though he warned me, "She's not giving interviews. And for God's sake, Walter, don't act like a reporter. She'll throw you out." I didn't know much about her then, a gap in my education I'm not proud of. I knew she played piano and sang, that she'd had a hit with "I Loves You, Porgy" a few years earlier, that critics called her sound indefinable. Classical training meets gospel meets blues, meets something nobody had quite named yet. I'd heard her voice on the radio once or twice, that low, deliberate contralto that didn't seduce so much as demand you pay attention. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that I would meet her during the week she was writing Mississippi Goddam. The rehearsal space was up a narrow staircase that smelled of old wood and decades of tobacco. The door was propped open. Inside, a single room with high ceilings, étude, battered piano, and almost no furniture. Late afternoon light came through unwashed windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted like snow. She was at the piano, her back to the door, playing something I didn't recognize. Not playing, really. Testing. Single notes, then chords, then a phrase repeated 3 times with slight variations. Stays out as if she were interrogating the melody itself. She wore a simple black dress, and her hair was pulled back severely. Her posture was absolutely erect. I waited. It seemed important not to interrupt. After perhaps 2 minutes, she stopped. "You can come in, Mr. Cronkite," she said without turning around, "or you can stand there watching. Oh, either way, I know you're present." "I apologize," I said, stepping inside. "I didn't want to disturb your work." "My work is already disturbed." She turned on the bench to face me. "That's why you're here, isn't it? To ask me about the disturbance." She was 30 years old that winter, though she carried herself with the gravity of someone much older. Her face was striking. High cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to look past surfaces into whatever mechanism was running underneath. There was no warmth in her expression, but no hostility either. She was simply assessing me with the same precision she'd been applying to those piano phrases. "I was told you don't give interviews," I said. "I don't." "Then I'm grateful for your time. Don't be grateful yet. I haven't decided whether to waste it on you. She gestured to a folding chair against the wall. Sit. But if you take out a notebook, you leave. Understood? I sat. The notebook stayed in my jacket pocket. For a long moment, she simply looked at me. Then she said, You covered Little Rock. I saw you on television. Yes. Those children walking into that school, those white people screaming at them. She paused. Did you understand what you were watching? I think so, I said. I hope so. No. She shook her head slowly. You understood it as news, as history happening. You didn't understand it as terror, as 9 children walking through a crowd that wanted to kill them, while cameras recorded it and the president did nothing. Her voice remained level, almost conversational. You can't understand that, Mr. Cronkite. You can go home afterward. She wasn't wrong. I said nothing. I watched those broadcasts in my apartment, she continued. I sat on my floor and I watched and I understood something about my country that I had been trying very hard not to understand. And then I went to a nightclub and sang love songs to white people who applauded politely and went home to their safe neighborhoods. And I thought, what am I doing? What is any of this for? She turned back to the piano and played a few bars of something. Later I would recognize it as I Loves You, Porgy, then stopped abruptly as if the music itself had disappointed her. They want me to be their idea of a Negro entertainer, she said, dignified, unthreatening. Proof that things aren't so bad. They want me to sing pretty songs so they can feel cultured and liberal without having to change a single thing about their lives. Is that why you're writing something new? I asked. She glanced at me sharply. Who told you that? No one, I'm guessing. You said your work was disturbed? A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You're less stupid than I expected. She ran her fingers silently across the keys, not pressing hard enough to make sound. Yes, I'm writing something new, something that will end my career in nightclubs, something that will make me unemployable in half the country. And I'm terrified, Mr. Cronkite, not of what will happen to me. I'm terrified that I won't have the courage to finish it. May I ask what it's about? It's about Mississippi, Alabama. It's about 4 little girls blown to pieces in a church. It's about Emmett Till and Medgar Evers and every lynching that happened while the rest of America looked away and hummed show tunes. Her hands had formed fists on her knees. It's about being so angry I can barely breathe. And it's going to be fast. Not a dirge, not a blues lament. Fast. Because this anger moves too quickly to be slow. She stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to me again. My manager says I'll lose everything. My record label says no one will play it. My friends say I'm throwing away the career I've built. She was silent for a moment. They're probably right. Then why write it? She turned, and for the first time I saw something unguarded in her face. Not vulnerability, exactly. Nina Simone was not vulnerable in any conventional sense, but something close to grief. Because I have to be able to look at myself, she said quietly. Because if I keep singing I Loves You, Porgy while Birmingham burns, I won't be able to live with who I am. Do you understand? It's not about courage. It's about basic survival. I have to tell the truth or I will disappear. I did understand. Not from my own experience. I had never faced such a choice. But I understood it the way you understand something larger than yourself when you're fortunate enough to witness it. Will you play it for me? I asked. No. She returned to the piano and sat down. But I'll play you something else. Something that shows you where I'm going. What she played next was Old Jim Crow, a traditional song I vaguely recognized but transformed. She played it hard, almost violently, yet her hands attacking the keys with a fury that made the old piano sound like it might break apart. Her voice, when she sang, was razor-edged, each word an accusation. She took what had been a historical artifact and made it a living indictment. When she finished, the room felt smaller. The air itself seemed compressed. "That's what I mean," she said, slightly breathless. "That's what I'm trying to do, not to comfort anyone, not to help anyone forget, to make them feel what I feel, what we all should feel when we see what's being done." "It's powerful," I said, and immediately regretted the inadequacy of the word. "It's necessary," she corrected. "There's a difference." We talked for another hour, though talked isn't quite right. She spoke about growing up in North Carolina, about studying classical piano, about the humiliations, large and small, that came with being who she was in America, about the peculiar loneliness of being an artist whose audience wanted her gifts, but not her truth. I mostly listened. At one point, she said something I've never forgotten. "They think music is an escape. They're wrong. Music is a trap. It catches you inside the truth you're trying to avoid. That's why it's dangerous. That's why it matters." She didn't play Mississippi Goddamn for me that day, but she told me it would be finished soon, that she would record it, that she would perform it, even if it cost her everything. "The country isn't ready for it," she said, "but it's never going to be ready. That's not a reason not to do it." As I was leaving, she said one more thing. "You asked why I agreed to see you. It's because journalists decide what history remembers. You choose which voices get heard. And I need you to remember that there were artists who refused to be quiet. When you write about this time, and you will, Mr. Cronkite, because you're good at what you do, remember that some of us chose truth over career, that it cost us, and that we did it anyway." I promised her I would remember. Nina Simone released Mississippi Goddamn in 1964. It was fast, furious, bitter, and brilliant, everything she'd promised it would be. Radio stations in the South broke the records in half and sent them back to the label. She was blacklisted from venues she'd played for years. Her career never recovered in the way it might have if she'd stayed safe. But the song endured. It became an anthem. It told a truth that needed telling, in a voice that refused to soften the blow. I saw her perform only once more, years later in the early 70s. She didn't remember me. Why would she? But I remembered her. I remembered that February afternoon when I watched an artist decide to become a witness, knowing what it would cost. I've covered wars and assassinations, treaties and elections. I've interviewed presidents and generals and revolutionaries. But when people ask me about the most important moments of my career, I think about Nina Simone in that rehearsal space, her hands hovering over piano keys, deciding whether to finish a song that would ruin her. She finished it, and it didn't ruin her, not really. It revealed her. There's a difference. I'm an old man now, and my reporting days are long past. But I remember what she told me, that music is a trap that catches you inside truth. I've thought about that definition of music often, and I've come to think it applies to journalism too, to any work worth doing. The trap that catches you inside truth, the cages you choose because the alternative is disappearing. Nina Simone chose not to disappear. She chose to burn instead, and those of us who witnessed it were changed by the light. That's the story. That's what happened. That's what I remember. And that, as I used to say, is the way it was.